Welcome. This video is going to be a deep dive into all the information I've acquired through my lean fatty liver diagnosis and reversal. Think of this as the guide that you wish your doctor had given you instead of just prescribing you diet and exercise. While all the info will apply to anyone trying to reverse fatty liver disease, or as it is more commonly known, MASLD, my personal experience is someone who is a normal weight and developed fatty liver through poor diet and a fairly sedentary lifestyle, because I've been strapped for time dealing with 2 kids under the age of 5, and at the time of my diagnosis, our 8-year-old golden retriever had just passed away, which led to me taking significantly less walks. While not obese by appearance or BMI, through my research I've come across scientific data that does allow me to offer some solid advice to the overweight crowd, but I will save that till the end. Since this is going to be a really long video, I will be including a table of contents and timestamps in the description below. Now that we've covered the introduction, let's jump right into blood work and labs, because that's how most of us found out we had fatty liver in the first place. When you get your results back, your doctor usually scans them for one thing: values flagged as high or low. This is an unfortunate reality of our medical system, at least here in the United States. Doctors are stretched thin dealing with patients who have more immediate, life-threatening problems. So they scan for flags, and if nothing is flagged, they tell you everything looks normal. But that word normal can be misleading. The first reason for this is that the lab reference ranges are based on a bell curve of the general population, and that curve shifts over time. So back in the 1970s and 80s, the average person was leaner and more metabolically healthy than we are today. As the population has gotten sicker, the bar for what's called normal has quietly moved with it. The American College of Gastroenterology has actually stated that the standard upper limits on most lab reports, usually in the 40 to 50 range for ALT and AST, they suggest that this true upper limit of a healthy liver is closer to 33 for men and 25 for women. So if your ALT comes back at a 39, the computer won't flag it and your doctor won't mention it, but your liver might already be asking for help. For those of us with lean fatty liver, like myself, normal is often exactly where this disease hides. I stopped relying on these portal flags and started putting my raw numbers into my own spreadsheet. When you look deeper, you start to see the story of your metabolism and what it is trying to tell you. Here are 5 markers and ratios that I track that go beyond just the AST and ALT enzyme values. Most people just check whether AST and ALT are elevated, but the relationship between those two tells a deeper story. The Ritis ratio is simply your AST number divided by your ALT number. If your ALT is higher than your AST, giving you a ratio below 1, that's actually a classic signature of early stage fatty liver. The liver is being irritated by fat accumulation, and this is exactly where I was at my diagnosis stage. If your AST is higher than your ALT, a ratio above 1, that can sometimes suggest that fibrosis is developing, or it may point towards alcohol-related liver disease. The goal is to keep both numbers low, ideally under 30, but watching which one is higher can give you important clues about where your liver stress is coming from and how it's progressing. GGT is highly specific to the liver and bile ducts. If your AST and ALT are borderline, but your GGT is elevated, that is a major red flag that your liver is struggling to clear toxins or deal with oxidative stress. The standard lab range is usually listed as somewhere between 9 and 48. I try to keep mine in the bottom half of that range, and my most recent result after reversing fatty liver was a 17. The triglyceride to HDL ratio. Alright, this is one of my personal favorites because it actually estimates insulin resistance, which is the root cause of fatty liver disease, and one of the reasons the name was changed to MASLD, Metabolic Dysfunction Associated Steatotic Liver Disease. And because it estimates insulin resistance, you don't need a special insulin test to figure it out. Take your triglycerides number and divide it by your HDL. Your good cholesterol. Here's how to read that number. If it's less than 2, This is a good zone, but you may be likely insulin sensitive. Greater than 3, there's a good chance insulin resistance is present, and greater than 6 may point to significant metabolic dysfunction. Here's why this matters, especially for lean people. Your A1C or fasting glucose might look perfectly fine, but if your triglycerides are at 150 and your HDL is 40, your ratio is then 3.75. Your body is signaling that it can't handle carbohydrates properly, even if you're thin on the outside. My personal goal is to keep this ratio as close to 1 as possible. Number 4 is ferritin. Ferritin is known as an iron storage marker, but it's also what's called an acute phase reactant, meaning it spikes when your body is dealing with inflammation. It's common for people with fatty liver to have elevated ferritin even when they don't actually have an iron overload. If the liver is inflamed, it releases ferritin into the bloodstream. So if your doctor tells you your iron values look high and suggests cutting out red meat, pause. Check your liver first. It might not be the steak, it might be the metabolic inflammation. Okay, and the 5th value I recommend you keep an eye on is platelets. This one is for anyone who wants to keep an eye out for cirrhosis risk. It can feel like a scary marker to watch, but you need to know about it. As liver disease progresses to significant scarring, the spleen gets enlarged and starts trapping platelets. A normal platelet count falls between 150,000 and 450,000. If your values are trending down year over year, that can be a sign of portal hypertension, or increased pressure in the blood vessels around the liver, which may be developing. Okay, moving on to other tests your doctor may have ordered. The first for me was an ultrasound. And getting an ultrasound to look at my liver was actually the first time I'd ever been lying on the imaging table. I've watched my wife go through it plenty of times for our pregnancies, but never from that angle. When you look at the results, focus on the 3 main things: the liver's size, shape, and texture, which doctors call echogenicity. A healthy liver typically looks smooth and has clean edges, and shows up as an even, medium gray color on the screen. If the image looks unusually bright or white, that often means extra fat is stored inside. If the surface looks bumpy instead of smooth, or the liver appears larger than normal, those are visual signs that something may be off. Another test doctors order is called an elastography or a Fibroscan. An elastography is a special type of ultrasound that measures how stiff or flexible your liver is. So if you think of a healthy liver like a soft, squishy sponge, when the liver sustains long-term damage, it forms scar tissue and becomes much stiffer, more like a piece of hard rubber. When you read an elastography report, you're looking for a number measured in kilopascals, or kPa. Some reports also use a color-coded map. Cooler colors like blue and green mean the liver tissue is soft and pliable. Warmer colors like yellow and red mean the sound waves traveling through the tissue quickly, which tells the doctor the liver is stiff and likely has some degree of scarring. Here are the ranges to estimate the general level of fibrosis. From 2 to 7 kilopascals is generally marked as F0 or F1, normal to minimal scarring. 7.5 to 10 kilopascals is F2, or moderate scarring. 10 to 14 kilopascals is F3 with severe scarring, while higher than 14 is F4 or cirrhosis of the liver. One important caveat is that elastographies can be difficult to administer accurate in larger individuals because excess tissue on the organs can interfere with the readings. It's worth knowing that going in, so don't rely on it 100%. Okay, now that you know what to look for in your blood work and labs, we can move on to focusing on things on how to reverse this disease. So we're going to move over to diet. As the saying goes, weight is lost in the kitchen, and that rings just as true for fat in the liver. The gold standard diet for both weight loss and reversing fatty liver disease is most often cited as the Mediterranean diet. It's also one of the most studied diets in the world, which matters. I think part of what makes it so practical is that you can portion your meals using one very simple visual guide. Personally, I'm a bit of a nerd, and I love weighing my ingredients to the gram and logging everything in a tracking app, but I realize that that's not realistic for most people, and honestly, it might be even be a barrier for some. At its core, the Mediterranean diet focuses on whole, natural foods over processed ones. The goal is a large volume of vegetables, a solid amount of healthy fats, adequate protein from lean animal or plant-based sources, and carbohydrates that come from whole grains and fruit, not boxes and bags. The Mediterranean plate is usually shown as something like the pie chart below, roughly half vegetables, a fifth protein, with the rest split between whole grains and healthy fats. You'll also see breakdowns showing what to eat daily, weekly, or monthly, which makes it easier to build a sustainable habit rather than just trying to overhaul everything at once. Now, another diet that gets a lot of attention, especially in social media and influencer circles, is the ketogenic diet, or sometimes called the carnivore diet. And you'll notice that this diet is rarely being pushed by medical doctors. To be fair, the ketogenic diet has been shown in multiple studies to significantly reduce liver fat, and to do so quickly. One study found meaningful reductions in liver fat in as little as a few days, even compared to a eukalorik diet, which is just a fancy term for saying that you ate exactly the number of calories your body needed, not more, not less. That's a real finding, and it's worth acknowledging. That said, I'm not personally convinced that there's enough long-term studies on how a ketogenic diet affects your overall health, particularly your heart. When most people do keto, they end up eating a very high amount of saturated fat from meat and butter, and that's a variable I don't think we fully understand yet over multiple decades. Here's what I do think is happening. Fatty liver is very often an insulin resistance problem, driven by too many refined carbohydrates and excess added sugar. When you strip those out and eat only fat and protein, your insulin spikes drop dramatically, and that likely explains a big part of why keto works. But unless you're getting all your fat from nuts and olive oil, you're still taking in a lot of saturated fat. Add in the high protein load, which can be hard on your kidneys over time, and the fact that it's an expensive way to eat, and I think most people are better served by a more balanced approach. There's also the fruit issue. Keto essentially eliminates fruit, and while I do think avoiding excess fructose is important, fruit offers real benefits. One of the most underrated ones, when you're eating enough fruit in your diet, you're less likely to reach for a cookie, a soda, or a bag of candy. It fills that craving in a way that actually is working for your liver instead of against it. Okay, jumping off of that soapbox, let's go into foods that we should avoid. It may go without saying, but let me lay it out clearly. You need to significantly cut back on processed foods because most of them are loaded with sugar. And I'm not just talking about the obvious stuff like candy and cookies. I'm talking about many of the store-bought breads, granola bars, cereals, instant oatmeals, flavored yogurts, and condiments. I have a whole video on this I'll link to below, because the number of healthy products hiding sugar on their labels is generally surprising. Personally, I think this can be one of the hardest parts of the whole process, especially if you're busy. Eating well requires some intentional planning at the grocery store and a little meal prep. It's not complicated, but it does take some thought. Here's a straightforward list of what to pull back on. Foods to avoid. Alcohol. Even moderate intake directly promotes liver fat accumulation. Soda and sugary drinks. Fruit juice. Eat a piece of fruit instead. You get the fiber, not just the fructose. Pre-packaged and ultra-processed items, especially those low in fiber. Most breakfast cereals. Candy. Cookies, pastries, and baked goods. Goodbye my donuts. Fried foods. Dried fruit, or as I like to call it, nature's candy. The water is gone, but the sugar stays. Fast foods. Foods high in trans fats or partially hydrogenated oils. Be sure to check your ingredient labels. Excessive refined carbohydrates. So I'm talking about huge portions of pasta, white rice, white bread, and potatoes, especially when they make up the majority of a meal without being balanced by healthy fat, protein, or fiber. If you want to take the guesswork out of what to actually buy, my grocery guide is linked below in the description. Okay, foods to eat. Here's the good news. The list of foods that support your liver is long and generally delicious once you get used to it. We're talking things like lean proteins from eggs, fatty fish like salmon, mackerel, sardines, tofu, beans and legumes, chicken, turkey, or lean beef. Vegetables. All vegetables are good, but kale, spinach, artichoke, broccoli, cauliflower, and peppers are especially liver friendly. Healthy fats. Nuts, olive oil, olives, avocado, chia seeds, flax seeds are all healthy fats. Fruits. Berries are the best choice as they're lower in fructose than other fruit. But all fruit is good, and don't let anyone tell you something other than that. You'll see a lot of fear-mongering around fruit in forums for fatty liver. During the active reversal stage, it's true, you may want to moderate the sweeter fruits. But if eating fruit is keeping you away from cookies and sodas, I wouldn't overthink it, and it's probably the least of your worries when it comes to changing your diet. Carbohydrates. Whole grains like quinoa, whole wheat pasta or bread, brown rice, and whole rolled oats. Fermented foods. Sauerkraut, kimchi, plain yogurt or Greek yogurt, kombucha, pickles. These support gut health, which is directly connected to your liver health. Drinks. Coffee and green tea are excellent. Just make sure you're not adding a ton of extra sugar. Sparkling water and still water are best choices for everyday drinking. If you have any questions about what to or not to eat, drop a comment below and we can analyze the food items together. Moving on to supplements. We tend to think of the liver as a lint trap in a dryer or an air filter in a car, something that gets dirty over time and needs a special product to scrub it clean. Milk thistle, dandelion root, liver detox blends, the supplement aisle is full of things promising to do exactly that. But that analogy breaks down pretty quickly. A dirty filter needs scrubbing. A fatty liver needs something different entirely. The organ is overwhelmed by excess energy. It's converted too much incoming fructose into fat and has nowhere left to store it. This is an overflow problem, not a hygiene problem. You cannot fix an energy surplus with a pill. You can't scrub away visceral fat with an herb. The only real way to unclog the liver is to stop the inflow, mainly by cutting excess fructose and refined sugar, and build a bigger drain, which is your muscle, to help remove fat from the liver. In fact, some herbal supplements can actually be dangerous. There are documented cases of people taking concentrated green tea extract and triggering acute liver injury. The irony is painful, trying to heal your liver and making it worse in the process. So whenever possible, I try to get what I need from food rather than a capsule. For anti-inflammatory support, I lean on spices, turmeric in particular, which contains curcumin, a well-studied anti-inflammatory compound. For liver stiffness and fibrosis, regular coffee and green tea consumption have real research behind them to be beneficial. And yes, even decaf counts. If blood work shows you're low in a specific vitamin or mineral, try and find a food source rich in that nutrient before reaching out for a supplement. Personally, I take 2 supplements, but situationally rather than daily. The first is an omega-3 fish oil pill. The main reason is simple. My wife cannot stand the smell of fish cooking, so I don't get to eat it as often as I'd like. I still try to get salmon in at least once a week, but the fish oil covers the gap, at least as best as possible. The second is magnesium, and I only take it on days where my food tracker shows I'm running low. Chia seeds are surprisingly high in magnesium, so on days I have chia pudding, I usually don't even need the supplement at all. The specific form I take is magnesium taurate because I deal with PVCs, premature ventricular contractions of the heart. which are basically heart palpitations. They get worse with stress and poor sleep raises your cortisol, which also happens to interfere with liver healing. So that one is doing double duty for me. The PIVENS trial, which is a well-designed clinical study, showed that vitamin E can meaningfully reduce liver inflammation in non-diabetic adults with fatty liver disease. That's a real and legitimate finding. However, high-dose vitamin E supplementation has also been associated with an increased risk of prostate cancer in some studies. I weighed that risk and decided it wasn't worth it for me personally. Instead, I get my vitamin E through almonds, spinach, and sunflower seeds, all of which happen to be on the Eat More list anyways. Vitamin D. For years I was taking a very high dose of a vitamin D supplement because I was told, like a lot of people, that everyone is deficient. I never checked my actual lab numbers, and it turned out I'd been pushing my calcium levels too high, which comes with its own set of problems. So I stopped taking the high dose supplement, and now I take it only if my blood tests show I actually need it. If I do, I stick to a much lower targeted dose. This is a good example of why getting your blood work done regularly matters. More of a good thing is not always better. Before we move off of diet, I want to share some practical tips that can help you eat more of the foods you love while also working with your body instead of against it, specifically when it comes to insulin resistance. The first tip is to eat slower. I know this sounds almost too simple, but the research backs it up. Eating the same meal in 5 minutes versus 30 minutes produces a meaningfully different insulin spike. Slowing down gives your gut time to signal fullness to your brain, which also helps you prevent overeating. If you're a fast eater, even just putting your fork down between bites can make a real difference. Eat your foods in the right order. In that same vein, the order in which you eat your food matters. Try starting your meal with vegetables, protein, and healthy fats first, and saving the carbohydrates for the end. Fiber and protein act as a buffer, slowing the absorption of sugar into your bloodstream and blunting your insulin response. The same plate, but better results, just in the order you've eaten it. Move after eating. Just 10 minutes of walking after a meal, or even a few sets of bodyweight squats or lunges, can significantly reduce your post-meal blood sugar spike. Your muscles act like a sponge for glucose, and even light movement activates that. You don't need a full workout. A short walk around the block counts. Okay, resistant starch. Cook, cool, and reheat your carbs. This one is a little known trick. When you cook a carbohydrate like pasta, potatoes, or rice, and then refrigerate it before eating it, whether you eat it cold or you reheat it again later, the cooling process converts some of the digestible starch into what's called resistant starch. Resistant starch is not fully broken down in the small intestine, so it causes a slower, smaller blood sugar rise and also feeds beneficial gut bacteria. It doesn't eliminate the carbohydrates, but it does make it slightly friendlier. The next one is great for beans and legumes. Okay, so I recommend swapping out half of your rice for beans or legumes. If you find yourself eating large portions of rice regularly, try replacing half of it with black beans, lentils, chickpeas, or another kind of legume. You get more fiber, more protein, and a lower glycemic load, and you'll stay fuller for longer. It's one of the highest return swaps you can make with very little adjustment to the meal. Track your food, at least for a while. As mentioned earlier, I love tracking all my food in food tracking app, so I strongly encourage that to keep your eye on your daily calories and macronutrients, your protein, fat, and carbohydrates. You don't have to do it forever, but doing it consistently for even a few weeks can be very eye-opening. Here's my own experience. I used to believe I needed to eat low fat, so I was eating too many carbs, probably more protein than I needed, and very little fat. I was hungry again 2 to 3 hours after every meal. When I shifted to well-balanced meals built around fiber, healthy monosaturated fats, a solid 30 to 35 grams of protein, and only a moderate amount of carbohydrates, I stopped getting hungry for 5 to 6 hours after eating. The snacking basically disappeared on its own. Most people are generally surprised by what they find when they start tracking their food. The goal isn't to obsess over every number, but is to build awareness so you can build better, healthier habits. Work with a registered dietitian. If none of the foods mentioned in this section sound like things you'd actually want to eat on a regular basis, please reach out to a registered dietitian. They are significantly more knowledgeable on all of this than I am, and they can build a meal plan that hits all of the nutritional targets using foods you actually enjoy. That matters more than any specific food on my list. Next up is the discussion of alcohol. This subject is a little difficult for me to talk about, not because I was an addict, but because I generally loved homebrewing my own beer. I brewed for years. I became a certified beer judge, and I competed in homebrew competitions a few times a year. But loving the craft didn't mean I was drinking heavily. Before my diagnosis, and really before kids slowed everything down, I'd have 1 or 2 beers in a sitting, maybe 4 or 5 total in a week. During my reversal, I had to take a hard look at alcohol and figure out whether it needed to go completely away or whether it had been a significant contributor of my situation in the first place. The more I thought about it, the clearer some old patterns became. In college, I was always the first one who got sick if I drank too much. Not just a headache. I'd be vomiting for hours the next morning. I figured I just had a weak stomach or couldn't hold my liquor. Then about 2 years ago, something happened that makes perfect sense to me now. I had 3 beers over the course of an evening, not a crazy amount, and then followed it up with a full quart of Moose Tracks chocolate ice cream. I woke up the next morning feeling like I'd been hit by a truck, vomiting, hungover for hours, completely out of the proportion to the 3 beers I drank. I didn't understand it at the time, but I had unknowingly subjected my liver to now what I'm going to call the metabolic double tap. Here's the biology behind it. We tend to categorize fatty liver as either alcoholic or non-alcoholic and treat them as 2 separate diseases, but biologically they're cousins. Alcohol is metabolized almost entirely in the liver, and it produces a toxic byproduct called acetaldehyde that directly damages liver cells. It also shuts down fat burning almost immediately. Fructose and sugar, on the other hand, are also processed primarily in the liver and trigger the creation of new fat through a process called de novo lipogenesis, which is essentially your liver converting excess sugar into triglycerides. When I combined the beer with the ice cream, I created a perfect storm. The alcohol told my liver, stop burning fat immediately. The fructose told my liver, start making new fat immediately. I was flooding my liver with material it couldn't process while simultaneously blocking its ability to clear anything out. My severe reaction wasn't a weak stomach, it was my liver overwhelmed beyond what it could handle. The metabolic double tap. If you're still using the old term, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, as I've been on almost this whole presentation, you might assume that alcohol isn't your problem, since it wasn't what caused this in the first place. But that logic doesn't hold up. If you have a fatty liver, your organ is already inflamed and already struggling to manage your baseline metabolism. Adding alcohol to an already stressed liver is like throwing gasoline on a house fire. It doesn't matter who started the fire, the gas is going to make it worse. So can you ever drink again? My honest answer is yes and no. While you're actively in the reversal stage, working to bring your fibrosis score down, normalize your liver enzymes, and improve your elastography, I'd strongly recommend not drinking at all. Your liver needs every resource it has to heal, and alcohol directly interferes with that process. Once you've generally turned a corner, you have a clean elastography, healthy enzyme levels, sustained improvement, moderate, occasional alcohol is probably fine for most people, but I wouldn't make it a habit, and definitely do not drink in excess. My own personal rules when I do drink is that I skip sweets that day, since combining alcohol and fructose is exactly what got me into trouble, and if I'm being honest, if I have to choose between a drink and a good dessert, I'm probably going to choose the dessert. What I've also noticed is that since cleaning up my diet and paying closer attention to my sleep, which I track with a fitness watch, I genuinely don't enjoy the way alcohol makes me feel anymore. The recovery just isn't worth it. When I'm craving something cold and carbonated, I reach for a sparkling water. Spindrift is my go-to. There's something about cracking one open and feeling that prickle on your tongue that scratches the same itch as a beer. And these days, instead of nerding out over grinding grain and monitoring the pH of my wort, I nerd out over water temperature and the perfect pour-over-coffee ratio. Different hobby, same obsessive energy. Okay, let's talk about exercise. This is where you can really accelerate your fatty liver reversal. Eating better is a massive piece of the puzzle, but exercise might actually be even more important. Without getting too deep into the metabolic science, exercise burns calories, and if you're building muscle, it gives excess glucose somewhere to go other than your liver. When I was first diagnosed, my immediate instinct was to run. Literally. I thought, I have fat in my liver, so I need to burn calories. I need to run, bike, swim, sweat this out. I see this reaction in almost everyone who gets diagnosed. They panic buy a pair of running shoes and try to cardio their way back to health. And look, cardio is great for your heart, but if you have fatty liver, it's only half of the solution. If you're doing a lot of cardio without building muscle at the same time, you may actually be leaving the underlying metabolic problem untreated. Let me explain why. Muscle matters more than you think. To understand why I prioritize weights over cardio, you need to understand where glucose goes after you eat it. When you eat a potato or a piece of fruit, it breaks down into glucose and enters your bloodstream. Think of it like cars entering a city. Your body has two main places to park those cars. Your muscles, which can ideally function like a large multi-level parking garage, and your liver, which is a small overflow lot that was never meant for long-term parking. Skeletal muscle is responsible for roughly 75% of insulin-stimulated glucose disposal. In medical terms, this is called a glucose sink. It's the primary destination for the sugar you eat. Here's the problem for many people with lean fatty liver. A significant number of us have low muscle mass, a condition called sarcopenia. We might look completely normal in clothes, but underneath, we don't have enough muscle on our frame. Going back to the analogy of the parking garage, you might only have one level instead of 10. When we eat a normal meal, that small garage fills up almost instantly. The glucose can't just stay in the bloodstream, so it gets diverted to the only place left, the liver. And the liver, overwhelmed and not designed for this, converts the excess glucose into fat, specifically triglycerides, and stores it. If you only do cardio, you're essentially driving those cars around the block to burn off some gas. That helps a little bit, but if you lift weights, you're building new levels of the parking garage. Growing larger muscles physically increases the number of places your body can store glucose. The more storage your muscles have, the fewer cars end up getting crushed into fat in your liver. So how should you build muscle? You can absolutely build muscle with bodyweight exercises, but you'll need to push near failure on each set for it to actually stimulate growth, and that takes a lot of repetitions. Personally, I prefer to lift heavier weights, 2 to 3 full-body resistance training sessions per week, targeting your major muscle groups, chest, shoulders, back, quads, and hamstrings, can make a real difference in your fatty liver reversal. If you're on a budget, scour Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist for used equipment. Kettlebells, dumbbells, a simple bench. You can put together a solid home setup for very little money and do squats, deadlifts, shoulder presses, chest presses, and rows without ever setting a foot in a gym. A local community center with a weight room is another great option. And of course, commercial gyms are always there if that's your preference. Cardio still counts. I want to put the emphasis on resistance training, but I'd be leaving something important out if I didn't mention cardio too. Gold standard recommendation is to get at least 150 minutes of brisk walking per week. This works out to just under 22 minutes a day, which really isn't that much if you think about it. And if you break it into 2 roughly 10-minute walks after meals, you're also getting the blood sugar benefit we talked about in the earlier tips section. Beyond walking, Any cardio you actually enjoy is worth doing. I personally love riding my bike. There's something about it that makes you feel like a kid again. Swimming is another preferred option of mine, and I actually try to do it twice a week for about an hour. If you choose one of these intense forms of cardio, the added bonus is you can generally eat a few more carbohydrates after the workout without the same metabolic consequence. Consider it a small reward for that extra high cardio effort. Okay, we've covered diet, alcohol, and exercise. But what if you're doing all those things and still struggling to move the needle on your lab work? It may be time to look at some other factors that could be quietly working against you. And the first one most people don't expect is sleep. I'll be honest, getting a full, genuinely restful night of sleep is something I struggle with. My watch says I've been in bed for 7 or 8 hours, but being in bed and being in a state of restorative rest are two completely different things, and I don't think I'm alone in that. Whether it's just kids waking you up, a mind racing, work stress, a partner who snores, or just the general low-grade anxiety of our modern life, a lot of us are walking around in a state of chronic, mild sleep deprivation without fully realizing it. When I started digging into the research, I found something that generally surprised me. Cortisol, your primary stress hormone, can be just as damaging to your liver as fructose. Let me explain why. Most of us think of stress as something we feel, but your liver experiences stress as a fuel emergency. When you're stressed or sleep deprived, your body releases cortisol. This is your survival hormone, the one designed to help you outrun a predator like a tiger. Cortisol sends a direct command to your liver. Dump sugar into the blood. We need energy right now. Your liver responds by performing a process called glucogenesis, where it manufactures new glucose and releases it into your bloodstream to fuel your escape. The problem is, there's no predator. There's no tiger that's chasing you. You're stressed about work, or lying awake at 3 a.m. with your mind spinning, or stuck in traffic. You're not getting up and sprinting anywhere. So your blood sugar spikes, but you don't burn it off. Your pancreas releases insulin to manage the spike, and when the insulin has nowhere useful to send the glucose, your liver takes it back and converts it into fat. This means you can eat a clean, low-carb diet and exercise consistently, and if your cortisol is chronically elevated, your body is still manufacturing its own sugar from the inside out. You're fighting this disease on two fronts at once, and unfortunately, one of them is kind of invisible. And here's the part that really connected the dots for me. Whenever I was running on poor sleep or going through a stressful stretch, I wasn't just tired, I was hungry, and hungry in a very specific way. I wasn't hungry and craving chicken or broccoli. I was craving cereal, chips, cookies, anything that was fast and sweet. This is actually a predictable biological failure. When cortisol spikes, your blood sugar and insulin rushes in to clear it. Your blood sugar can crash hard afterwards. That crash signals your brain that you're starving and need quick, immediate fuel. So you reach for the carbs, not because you're weak, but because your hormones are telling you to. And when you give in to that craving, you're pouring gasoline on a glucose fire that your stress hormones already started. Recognizing this pattern was genuinely useful to me. When I noticed that specific craving, the urgent, junk food specific hunger, I now try to ask myself, am I actually hungry or am I stressed or sleep deprived? So what can you do about it? Well, I'm not going to tell you to just stress less. I know that's not helpful advice. But there are some things we're trying that have some real evidence behind them. The first is winding down intentionally. Doom scrolling on your phone does not reset your nervous system, even though it may feel like a break. For me, something low stimulation at the end of the night, like watching a calm show, sitting in quiet, actually helps my body downshift. For others, it might be reading or stretching or putting on some relaxing music. Find what generally calms you down at the end of the night and not what just distracts you. Try breathing exercises during acute stress. This one sounds almost too simple, But slow, controlled breathing, particularly longer exhales, activates your parasympathetic nervous system and can measurably reduce cortisol in the moment. If you wake up at 3 a.m. with your mind racing, this is worth trying before you reach for your phone to distract you. Get morning light. Getting natural sunlight or using a sunrise alarm clock in the morning helps regulate your circadian rhythm, which in turn improves sleep quality over time. Your body's cortisol cycle is tightly linked to your light exposure. Getting this right during the day pays dividends at night. Consider magnesium. If your food tracker or blood work suggests you're low, taking a magnesium supplement 30 to 60 minutes before bed may help you relax and improve your sleep quality. It's one of the most commonly depleted minerals in adults and one of the cheaper, lower risk things worth trying. In a lot of ways, sleep and stress are the hardest variables in this whole equation because you can't always control them the way you can control what's on your plate. Do what you can, build in what margins you're able to, and don't be too hard on yourself when life gets in the way. It's a factor to manage, not a box to perfectly check off. A note on GLP-1 medications. If you're significantly overweight and have been generally working at this for months or years, and I mean seriously working on it, cleaning up your diet, exercising consistently, making real lifestyle changes, and the needle still isn't moving, then yes, a GLP-1 medication like Ozempic or Wegovy may be a legitimate option worth discussing with your doctor. I'm not here to shame anyone for needing medical help. That said, I'd strongly encourage everyone to make an honest effort from a holistic standpoint first, and here's why I feel that way. The Step 1 clinical trials, the major studies behind semaglutide, showed that weight loss on those medications can consist of up to 40% lean muscle mass, not just fat. You're not just shrinking. You're potentially losing a significant portion of the very tissue that we just discussed helps your body manage glucose. And there's also substantial evidence that when people stop taking these drugs, they regain most or all of the weight. This is largely because GLP-1 medications work by suppressing appetite through hormonal pathways. And when the medication stops, those hunger signals come back even stronger than before. If you watch the Netflix documentary on The Biggest Loser, you've seen a version of this play out in real time. Almost all of the contestants had regained most or all of their weight after the show, because the approach was essentially extreme starvation combined with unsustainable levels of exercise. The two contestants who hadn't regained the weight both acknowledged they were currently on GLP-1 medication. For someone with fatty liver specifically, I think this cycle could be particularly harmful. If you lose a significant amount of muscle mass on the medication, then stop taking it and regain the weight as fat, you've shifted your body composition in the wrong direction. Less muscle, more fat, and a liver that now has an even smaller glucose sink to work with. That's not a good outcome. If you do go on one of these medications, incorporating the resistance training we discussed earlier isn't optional, it's essential. And to be clear, I'm not anti-medication across the board. There's actually a newer drug I want to make sure everyone knows about because it's specifically designed for fatty liver disease. It's called Rezdiffra, resmetirom, and it was an FDA approved in 2024 for adults with moderate to advanced liver fibrosis due to NASH. Unlike GLP-1 drugs, which suppress appetite and reduce overall caloric intake, affecting the whole body in the process, Rezdiffra works differently. It's a liver-direct thyroid hormone receptor agonist, meaning it specifically activates receptors in the liver that stimulate fat burning, without the systemic muscle loss associated with the aggressive caloric restriction. It's a precision medicine approach targeting the organ that actually needs the help. That's genuinely exciting, and it represents a meaningful shift in how we can treat this disease. If medication is something you and your doctor are considering, I encourage you to ask about Rezdiffra specifically and how it compares to a GLP-1 for your situation. I won't sugarcoat it. Reversing fatty liver disease and keeping it that way requires a real lifestyle shift, not a temporary diet, not a 30-day challenge. A fundamental change in how you think about food, movement, and the way you take care of yourself. For most people, that's close to a complete 180 from where you started, and I don't take lightly how hard that is. You need support along the way. That's exactly why I'm here. If this content has been helpful, I'd love for you to hit subscribe and join the newsletter. I'm not selling anything. I'm just trying to put genuinely useful information in front of people who are navigating this the same way I did. Hopefully this guide has given you some inspiration or at least jump-started you on the right path. You've got this.